It started the way these moments usually do in the NFL. Loud, confident, and dismissive. A former head coach sitting comfortably behind a studio desk decided it was time to unload on someone still in the fight. The words weren't subtle, they weren't measured, they were sharp, public, and designed to sting. One take turned into a full teardown, and for a brief moment it looked like business as usual. Another coach criticized, another firing justified, another narrative stamped and shipped for the week. But this time, the script flipped, because the response didn't come from another analyst, it didn't come from a rival coach or a front office source whispering off the record. It came from a young quarterback who hasn't played a single NFL snap, and somehow that made it hit harder. One post, fired off without hesitation, exposed something that had been simmering under the surface for years. Not anger, not ego, frustration. Frustration with who gets to speak, who gets protected, and who gets blamed when things fall apart. And once that message went viral, this stopped being about one fired coach or one loud TV rant. It became a mirror held up to the league itself. Old voices versus new ones, legacy versus relevance, authority versus accountability. What happened next didn't just dominate timelines, it cracked open a conversation the NFL has tried to control for decades. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Rex Ryan didn't tiptoe into the conversation, he kicked the door down. Sitting on live television, the former head coach turned analyst went straight for Kevin Stefanski, unloading a critique that felt less like analysis and more like a verdict. According to Rex, the Browns' struggles were simple. The offense was flat, the quarterback situation was a mess, and when it mattered most, January came and went without results. In his eyes, that was the only context that mattered. Then came the comparison that lit the fuse. Rex lumped Stefanski in with coaching relics, calling him the modern version of Norv Turner, smart on paper, polished at the podium, but ultimately someone who couldn't win when the lights were brightest. It was the kind of line designed for clips, the kind that spreads fast because it's blunt and absolute. No gray area, no qualifiers, just a clean, harsh judgment delivered with trademark confidence. What stood out wasn't just what Rex said, it was what he ignored. There was no mention of the injuries that shredded Cleveland's roster, no acknowledgement of the quarterback chaos that forced constant reinvention, no pause to recognize that this was still the Browns, a franchise that has chewed through stability for decades. All of that was brushed aside to push a familiar message: if you don't win big, nothing else counts. And that tone mattered. Rex didn't sound conflicted, he didn't sound empathetic, he sounded smug. Like someone speaking from a place of unquestioned authority, as if time away from the sideline hadn't changed anything, as if his past success still gave him the final word on the present. That's what rubbed people the wrong way. Not critique, but certainty. Because here was a man who hadn't coached a team in nearly a decade, talking like the league hadn't evolved since he left it, launching shots with the confidence of someone who believed his resume made him immune from pushback. And for years, that's usually how it worked. Analysts spoke, coaches absorbed it, players stayed quiet. But this time, that silence didn't last. In the moment Rex finished talking, the fallout was already loading. Shedeur Sanders didn't ease into the moment, he stepped straight into it. While the clip of Rex Ryan's rant was still bouncing across timelines, Shedeur Sanders logged on and said what most players would normally keep to themselves. No cryptic wording, no vague shots, just a direct response that went straight at the source of the criticism instead of dancing around it. What made the post explode wasn't volume, it was precision. Shedeur didn't insult Rex, he didn't call him names or question his character. He questioned his credibility. He pointed out the record, the years away from the sideline, the fact that someone without a coaching job since 2016 was speaking with absolute certainty about what it takes to win in today's league. It was calm, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The kind of message that feels obvious once it's said out loud, but shocking because no one had said it before. And that's why it landed the way it did. This wasn't a spoiled kid jumping into grown man business. This was a young quarterback who's grown up around the game, watched how narratives are created, and decided he wasn't going to play the silent role anymore. Shedeur wasn't just defending Kevin Stefanski, he was calling out a pattern. Former coaches turned analysts, acting like their past automatically outranks the present. Within minutes, football Twitter caught fire. Players liked the post, fans screenshotted it, debates exploded across timelines and comment sections. For a lot of people, it felt refreshing. Someone finally said what players have whispered for years, that the loudest voices aren't always the most informed, that failing forward into a studio chair doesn't equal permanent authority. And the timing made it even louder. Shedeur doesn't even play on Sundays yet, but his words carried weight because they spoke to something bigger than one coach or one take. They touched on respect, on accountability, on the growing frustration players feel watching careers get reduced to sound bites by people who no longer live the grind. That's when it became clear. This wasn't just a viral clapback, it was a line being drawn, and once that line was crossed, there was no pulling the conversation back to business as usual. What Shedeur tapped into goes way beyond one comment and one response. It exposed a power shift that's been quietly building inside the NFL for years. For decades, the formula was simple. Players played, coaches coached, analysts talked, and whatever came out of a studio desk usually became the story, whether it captured reality or not. Challenging that structure was rare, and when it happened, it usually came with backlash. But that old hierarchy doesn't hold the same weight anymore. Social media changed the flow of power, and younger players understand it better than anyone. They don't need permission to speak. They don't need filtered quotes or post-game pressers to get a message out. One post can reach millions, bypassing producers, editors, and talking points entirely. That's the part traditional media still struggles to fully accept. Figures like Rex Ryan represent an era where reputation alone carried authority. Past success bought unlimited runway, hot takes were shielded by resumes, and players, especially young ones, were expected to absorb criticism quietly, no matter how disconnected it felt. But the modern player doesn't see it that way. They see their bodies on the line. They see the injuries, the instability, the pressure cycles fans never experience. And they're less willing to let someone who hasn't lived that reality in years define it for them. That's why this moment felt different. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't reckless, it was measured, which made it more threatening. Shedeur didn't break decorum, he broke the illusion that analysts speak from an unchallengeable high ground. And once that illusion cracks, every loud take gets re-examined.
Fans noticed too, not just because drama is entertaining, but because it felt honest. A young player saying, check the context, check the resume, check the reality. That resonates in a league where narratives often travel faster than facts. And it signals something important. The era of one-sided commentary is fading. This wasn't just media versus players, it was credibility versus comfort. And once that balance shifts, the entire conversation around the league starts to sound different. That question sat at the center of everything. Was Kevin Stefanski really the problem, or was he simply the easiest solution? From the outside, the argument sounded clean. Inconsistent offense, no long-term answer at quarterback, another season that never fully took off. In the NFL, that math usually ends one way. But the deeper you look, the messier the picture gets. Stefanski didn't inherit stability in Cleveland, he inherited chaos and was asked to make it look organized. Quarterbacks rotated constantly, game plans were rewritten on short notice, injuries stacked up at the worst possible times. Every week felt like damage control, not development, and yet the team stayed competitive longer than most expected. Wins came when they shouldn't have. Blow-ups didn't spiral the way they used to in Cleveland. That doesn't make headlines, but inside a locker room, it matters. His style didn't help his public image either. Stefanski wasn't fiery, he didn't pound podiums or throw anyone under the bus. He kept his answers measured, leaned on accountability, and absorbed criticism without escalating it. For some, that calm read as control. For others, it read as weakness, and in a results-driven league, perception can be just as powerful as reality. There had been rumblings long before the final decision. Reports suggested ownership wanted more than stability. They wanted certainty, a clear identity, a team that didn't just survive adversity, but overwhelmed it. Stefanski's playoff win in previous years bought time, but every season after tightened the leash. By the time late-season losses piled up, the narrative was already written. Fair or not, the head coach was going to take the hit. That's why the firing landed the way it did. Not shocking, but heavy. Players spoke carefully. Some defended him outright. Others chose silence that said enough. Inside the building, there was a sense that Stefanski hadn't failed. He'd been outpaced by expectations that ignored context. And when he walked away without protest, without bitterness, it only added to the feeling that Cleveland might have just cut loose the one thing holding everything together. Which made the timing brutal, because while the league argued about whether he deserved to be gone, something historic was unfolding on the field, and almost no one was paying attention. In the middle of all that noise, history quietly happened. Myles Garrett did what very few defenders in league history have ever done. He turned an entire season into a statement. Sack after sack. Double teams didn't slow him down. Game plans didn't stop him, and by the time he reached the record, it wasn't a fluke or a padded stat. It was dominance stretched across months, the kind that's supposed to stop everything else for a moment. But it didn't. Instead of the league freezing to recognize greatness, the moment got swallowed. Coverage pivoted fast. Debates broke out over coaching decisions, media feuds, and organizational dysfunction. Analysts argued about everything except what just happened on the field. Should the game have
Paused? Did the league mishandle the moment? Fans went back and forth, but the bigger truth sat right there. A generational achievement was being treated like a footnote. Garrett felt it, even if he didn't say it outright. He celebrated with teammates, stayed professional, and did what stars are trained to do. But when he spoke about the season, his words carried more weight than joy. He praised the locker room. He credited the culture that had kept the team together. And without naming anyone, he made it clear that stability mattered more than headlines, that structure mattered more than noise. What made it sting was the timing. This wasn't a meaningless milestone. Garrett carried Cleveland's defense all year. Every week, offenses built entire game plans around him and still couldn't slow him down. He earned that record the hard way, against constant attention, while the team around him struggled to find traction. It should have been the crown jewel of the season. Instead, it became collateral damage. Because while Garrett etched his name into the books, the spotlight stayed fixed on fired coaches and viral arguments. And that contrast told the real story of the Browns' season. Excellence on the field, chaos everywhere else. A reminder that even when players give you something historic, dysfunction has a way of stealing the moment. Inside the locker room, the story sounded very different from what was playing on television. There were no hot takes, no dramatic conclusions, just players who lived the season week by week, carrying bruises, learning new game plans on the fly, and trying to stay connected while everything around them shifted. To them, the season wasn't a failure in the way it was being framed, it was survival. Players don't measure leadership by sound bites, they measure it by structure, by consistency, by whether a coach shows up the same way after a win or a loss. That's where much of the frustration came from. On TV, the narrative was simple: fire the coach, reset the culture, move on. In the locker room, it felt backwards. Chemistry had finally started to form, roles were clear, and despite the chaos at quarterback, the team never fully fractured. That doesn't happen by accident. Comments from leaders like Myles Garrett weren't emotional pleas, they were reality checks. He spoke about patience, about how constant resets keep teams stuck in the same loop, about how tearing things down every few years doesn't magically build trust or execution. From a player's perspective, continuity isn't comfort, it's oxygen. That disconnect is what TV narratives often miss. Fans see wins and losses. Players see meetings, relationships, accountability, and systems that either hold under pressure or collapse. When those systems get ripped out prematurely, everyone pays the price. New terminology, new expectations, new timelines, and veterans are asked once again to buy in. So while analysts argued about playoff legitimacy and coaching resumes, players were asking a different question entirely. Why does progress always get interrupted before it has a chance to stabilize? It's a question that doesn't fit neatly into a 30-second segment, but it lives loud inside every locker room that's been forced to start over. And that's why Shedeur's comments resonated the way they did. Because from the player's point of view, the problem wasn't just criticism, it was criticism without context. Rex Ryan didn't lose this moment because someone yelled louder than him. He lost it because the ground underneath his authority shifted. After the initial backlash, the tone changed, the bravado softened. The certainty cracked just enough for people to notice. He didn't fire back online. He didn't escalate. Instead, he adjusted, offering measured words about respecting younger players and acknowledging talent, the kind of recalibration that usually comes after the internet has already rendered its verdict. What stood out was the contrast. This was the same Rex Ryan who built his reputation on being unapologetic, loud, defiant, a coach who thrived on confrontation and swagger. But in this case, doubling down didn't work. The audience wasn't reacting to volume anymore. They were reacting to receipts, records, timelines, context, and once that door opened, his resume wasn't protecting him the way it used to. There's irony there. Rex once connected deeply with players. He empowered them, created belief, made teams feel dangerous, but the league moved on while he stayed frozen in the version of authority that no longer goes unquestioned. That's why Shedeur's words hit so cleanly. They weren't disrespectful, they were reflective. They forced a comparison Rex didn't control, and Rex felt it. You could hear it in the hedging language, the added qualifiers, the subtle shift away from absolutes. He still defended his take, but the edge was gone. The invincibility too. For the first time in a long time, a media voice had been checked publicly and couldn't spin it. Fans noticed. Players noticed, and that's what made the moment stick. Not because Rex was wrong or right about one coach, but because he learned in real time that the rules had changed. In today's NFL, authority isn't granted by the past, it's tested in the present. And this time, Rex didn't pass the test. When the noise finally settled, nothing looked the same. Even though on the surface, everything kept moving. Kevin Stefanski was still gone. The Browns were still staring at another reset. Rex Ryan was still behind a microphone. But the impact of that moment lingered in ways that don't show up in standings or press releases. Something shifted, quietly but unmistakably. This wasn't just a feud or a viral exchange. It was a signal, a reminder that the league's power dynamics are changing in real time. Players aren't just absorbing narratives anymore, they're challenging them. Credibility isn't automatic just because someone did something once, a long time ago. In today's NFL, every opinion is fair game for scrutiny, and every loud take comes with the expectation that it can be challenged publicly. That's what made Shedeur's response matter. He didn't fix Cleveland's problems, he didn't save a coach's job, but he forced a pause. He reminded fans, analysts, and even the league itself that the most accurate perspective doesn't always come from studios or legacy resumes. Sometimes it comes from the people still grinding, still studying film, still carrying the weight of expectations that never show up on television. For the Browns, the questions remain unanswered. Stability still feels fragile. Trust still feels conditional. And stars like Myles Garrett are left wondering how many times a system can reset before it breaks completely. But for the league as a whole, this moment marked something bigger, a crack in the old script. The days of unchecked criticism are fading, not because debate is going away, but because accountability is spreading. The players aren't just the product anymore. They're the voice, the context, and now the response. And the next time a legacy voice fires off a take without looking in the mirror first, they'll know something Rex Ryan knows now. Someone younger, sharper, and fully connected is already watching.